My boyfriend's mom is ruining our relationship, and I'm starting to think he will never choose me over her. Hey everyone, I really need to vent and get some advice. I'm a 27-year-old woman who's been dating my 30-year-old boyfriend, Brandon, for about a year and a half now. I love him, I really do, but there's a huge issue in our relationship that's driving me crazy: his mother. I've always heard horror stories about overbearing mothers-in-law, but I never thought I'd end up in one of those situations. Yet here I am, dealing with a woman who seems hellbent on making my life miserable. From the very beginning, Brandon's mom, Linda, has been difficult. When I first met her, she was polite enough, but there was always this underlying tension that I couldn't quite put my finger on. She'd make passive-aggressive comments about my appearance, my job, even my cooking. "Oh, you're a graphic designer? That's nice. But don't you ever worry about job security? It's not exactly a stable career, is it?" Or Brandon used to date a girl who was such a great cook. "He loves homemade meals, you know. It's too bad you're so busy with work." I tried to brush it off, thinking she was just protective of her son and maybe a little old-fashioned, but as time went on, it got worse. Much worse. Linda calls Brandon every day. I'm not talking about a quick check-in, I'm talking about hour-long conversations where she grills him about every detail of his life. If he doesn't pick up, she'll leave multiple voicemails, each one increasingly frantic. If he's with me, she'll insist that he leaves to go see her, even if we have plans. She lives just a few blocks away from us, so it's easy for her to demand his time and attention whenever she wants. And the worst part? Brandon always goes. He drops everything to cater to her every whim, and it's starting to feel like I'm in a relationship with both of them. One night, Brandon and I were supposed to have a romantic dinner at home. I'd spent the whole day preparing, trying to make it special. But as soon as Brandon walked in the door, his phone rang. It was Linda, of course. She had a bad feeling and needed Brandon to come over immediately. I was so upset, but Brandon just looked at me and said, "You know how she is. I'll just be gone for a little while." He didn't come back until hours later, long after the food was cold and I'd gone to bed, crying. The next morning, he acted like nothing was wrong, like it was totally normal to abandon our plans to rush over to his mom's house because she had a bad feeling. I've tried to talk to Brandon about this multiple times, but he always brushes it off. He says I'm overreacting, that Linda is just lonely since his dad passed away a few years ago. I get that, I really do, but at what point does it stop being about comforting his grieving mother and start being about the fact that she's manipulating him? I can't even count the number of times we've had to cancel plans, miss events, or cut dates short because Linda needed him. And it's not just me who's noticed. My friends and even Brandon's friends have pointed out how unhealthy their relationship is, but Brandon refuses to see it. The final straw happened last weekend. Brandon and I were looking at apartments together, talking about taking the next step in our relationship. I was so excited, thinking this was a sign that he was finally ready to put us first. But then Linda found out. She called Brandon, furious that he hadn't consulted her about the decision. She went on and on about how he was abandoning her and how she couldn't believe he'd even think about moving out without her approval. Brandon, to my utter shock, actually apologized to her and told her we wouldn't move forward with anything until she was comfortable with it. I was livid. I confronted Brandon and told him that this was supposed to be our decision, not his mother's. He got defensive, saying that I didn't understand how hard things have been for Linda since his dad died, and that I needed to be more patient. I told him that I'm not asking him to cut her out of his life, but that I need him to set boundaries. He said he would, but I don't believe him. Every time he's promised to stand up to her in the past, he's caved the moment she so much as raises her voice. I'm starting to think that Brandon is a mama's boy who will never choose me over her. I love him, but I don't know if I can keep living like this. I feel like I'm competing with his mom for his attention, and it's exhausting. I want to build a future with Brandon, but how can I do that if he's still so tied to his mother's apron strings? Update 1. Hi Reddit, I want to thank everyone who reached out with advice and support after my original post. I've taken some time to process everything, and I had a serious talk with Brandon about our relationship and his mother's interference. It didn't go the way I hoped, but I need to share what happened because things have taken a turn for the worse. After reading all of your comments, I realized that I had to put my foot down with Brandon, once and for all. So, I sat him down and told him that I couldn't continue in this relationship if he wasn't willing to set clear boundaries with Linda. I laid it all out, how she's constantly undermining me, how I feel like I'm competing with her for his attention, and how I'm tired of always being second to her needs. I told him that if he didn't start putting our relationship first, I would have to walk away. Brandon looked genuinely torn. He said he loves me and wants a future with me, but he also kept repeating that I just don't understand how hard things are for his mom. He said he can't just cut her out of his life or refuse her when she needs him because she's been through so much. I told him that I'm not asking him to cut her out, but to establish some healthy distance, to stop letting her dictate his every move. But he kept making excuses, saying that she's his only family left and that he can't abandon her. Then, the conversation took a dark turn. Brandon admitted that Linda had called him earlier in the day and said she was feeling sick and needed him to come over. When he told her he was planning to stay home and talk to me, she guilt-tripped him, saying that she could be having a heart attack for all he knew and that he'd regret not being there if something happened to her. So, he went even though he knew how important this conversation was to me, he still went to her. I was furious. I asked him what he would do if we got married, had kids, and his mother still pulled these stunts. Would he drop everything and run to her every time? He didn't have an answer, and that scared me more than anything. I realized that I was talking to someone who was so deeply entrenched in his mother's grasp that he might never be able to escape it. That night, I told Brandon I needed some space to think things over. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. He was upset, but he didn't try to stop me, just said he understood and that he hoped I'd come back soon. I could tell he was torn between me and his mother, but I needed him to show me that he was willing to fight for us. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of texts from Linda. Somehow, she'd gotten my number, probably from Brandon, and was blowing up my phone with messages accusing me of stealing her son, of being a bad influence, and of ruining his life. She even threatened to expose me to Brandon, claiming she had dirt on me that would make him see who I really was. It was insane. I didn't even bother responding, I just blocked her number. But the damage was done. I felt like my entire relationship was unraveling, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Later that day, Brandon showed up at my friend's apartment, looking like he hadn't slept. He said he was worried about me and wanted to talk. I let him in, and we started talking again, but this time it felt different. He was more on edge, more defensive. He told me that his mom had called him, crying, saying that she didn't want to lose him and that I was trying to drive a wedge between them. She told him that if he stayed with me, he'd be choosing me over his own mother and that he'd regret it for the rest of his life. I was stunned. I asked him what he wanted, really wanted. And then, in a moment that shattered my heart, Brandon said he didn't know. He said he was torn between his love for me and his obligation to his mother. He said he needed time to figure things out. I could see the guilt and confusion in his eyes, but it wasn't enough. I needed him to choose me, to choose us, but he couldn't. So, I told him that I was done waiting for him to make a decision. I told him that I loved him, but I couldn't stay in a relationship where I was always going to be second best. I told him that I was leaving for good and that I hoped he'd figure things out, but that I couldn't put my life on hold any longer. Brandon didn't say anything as I packed my things. He just stood there, watching me with this pained expression, like he wanted to stop me but didn't know how. As I walked out the door, I turned back one last time and saw him sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. I thought that would be the last image I'd have of him, but I was wrong. Update 2. Hi Reddit, I wish I could say that I'm doing better, but things have taken an even darker turn. I really thought I was done with this situation, but it's clear that Linda isn't going to let me go without a fight, and now, Brandon is getting dragged even deeper into her web. After I left Brandon, I tried to move on. I blocked him and Linda on all platforms, changed my number, and even moved into a new apartment to start fresh. I thought that if I put enough distance between us, they'd eventually leave me alone. But I underestimated just how far Linda would go to keep her son under her control. A week after I moved into my new place, I started getting strange phone calls from unknown numbers. At first, I ignored them, but they kept coming, multiple times a day. When I finally answered one, it was Linda. She had somehow gotten my new number, and she was furious. She accused me of abandoning Brandon, of being a coward, and of ruining his life. She said that Brandon was devastated without me and that it was all my fault. She even went as far as to say that Brandon had been admitted to the hospital for stress-related issues, and that if anything happened to him, it would be on me. I was shaken. I knew Linda was manipulative, but this was a whole new level. I hung up and immediately called the hospital, worried that Brandon might really be in danger. But when I reached out to them, they had no record of Brandon being admitted. That's when it hit me, Linda was lying. She was using my concern for Brandon to try and manipulate me into coming back, to make me feel guilty and responsible for her son's well-being. I was furious. I called Brandon, something I hadn't planned on doing, to confront him about what his mother had said. When he answered, I could tell right away that he was at home, not in the hospital. He sounded tired, like he hadn't slept in days. I asked him what was going on, and he hesitated before finally admitting that his mom had been trying to get in touch with me. When I told him about the lies she'd been spreading, he was silent for a long time before saying, "She just wants what's best for me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even after everything, Brandon was still defending her, still making excuses for her behavior. I told him that this was the final straw, that I was done with both of them, and that I didn't want to hear from either of them again. But Brandon wouldn't let it go. He started blaming me for leaving, for abandoning him when he needed me most. He said that if I really loved him, I would have stayed and helped him deal with his mother instead of running away. I was stunned. Here was the man I had loved, the man I had hoped to build a future with, telling me that all of this was somehow my fault. I realized then that Linda had completely warped his mind, that he was so deep under her control that he couldn't see the situation for what it really was. I told him that I couldn't be in his life anymore, not if he was going to keep letting his mother manipulate him, and I hung up. But it didn't end there. The next day, I found a note slipped under my door. It was from Linda. She had found out where I lived and had the nerve to come to my apartment. The note was full of vitriol, accusing me of breaking her son's heart, of being a homewrecker, and of ruining a perfectly good man. She told me that I was never good enough for Brandon, that he deserved someone who would know her place and respect his relationship with his mother. She ended the note by saying that I would regret leaving him, that I would never find anyone as good as her son, and that she would make sure of it. I'm scared, read it. I don't know what to do. I've considered getting a restraining order, but I don't know if that will stop her. I'm terrified that she'll keep finding ways to get to me, to make my life miserable until I go back to Brandon. But I can't do that. I won't let her win, but I don't know how much more of this I can take. I never thought I'd be in this situation, being harassed by my ex's mother and manipulated at every turn. I'm trying to stay strong, but it's hard when I feel like I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next attack. I don't know what Linda is capable of, and that scares me more than anything. If anyone has been through something like this, please let me know how you handled it. I feel so alone in this, and I don't know what my next move should be. Update 3. Hi Reddit, I'm back again, and I really wish I wasn't. I don't even know how to begin because everything has escalated to a point that I didn't think was possible. Linda is more unhinged than ever, and Brandon, well, I don't even recognize the person he's become. After my last update, I decided to get a restraining order against Linda. I couldn't take the constant harassment anymore, and I needed to protect myself. The process was exhausting and emotional, but I felt a little bit safer knowing that there were legal boundaries in place. For a while, it seemed like things were calming down. Linda stopped calling, and I hadn't seen or heard from Brandon. I started to think that maybe, just maybe, they had finally decided to leave me alone. But then, last week, I came home from work to find my apartment door slightly open. My heart dropped into my stomach. I knew I had locked it before leaving, and there was no sign of forced entry. I cautiously stepped inside, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. As I walked through my apartment, I noticed that things were out of place, drawers were open, my clothes were scattered, and my laptop was missing. But the most chilling discovery was in my bedroom. On my bed, there was a single rose, and next to it, a photo of Brandon and me from when we first started dating. The picture had been defaced, my face was crossed out with red marker, and written across the bottom were the words, "You'll never be rid of me." I felt sick. I knew right away that this was Linda's doing. The police came, took my statement, and opened an investigation, but I could tell they thought it was just some petty harassment case. They didn't seem to grasp the level of fear I was living in. I knew then that I couldn't stay in that apartment. I packed a bag and went to stay with a coworker, who's been kind enough to let me crash on her couch while I figure out what to do next. But the fear hasn't gone away. I keep looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next attack. Every time my phone rings, I jump, half expecting it to be another call from a blocked number. And then, 2 nights ago, Brandon showed up at my coworker's place. I don't know how he found out where I was staying, but there he was, standing outside the building, looking more disheveled than ever. He was holding the same rose from my apartment, and the sight of him made my blood run cold. He was crying, saying he was sorry, that he just wanted to talk. But I couldn't bring myself to go outside. I watched from the window as he paced back and forth, muttering to himself, looking like a man on the edge. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, Brandon was gone. They told me they'd try to find him, but I knew better than to expect much. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm trapped in this nightmare with no way out. Linda has completely poisoned Brandon's mind against me, and now I'm dealing with a man who's more unstable than ever. I'm scared that he'll do something drastic, that this will end in violence. I can't believe that someone I once loved has become a stranger to me, someone who's now a threat to my safety. I'm considering moving out of state, but even that doesn't feel like enough. I don't know if there's anywhere I can go where they won't find me. I'm exhausted, terrified, and completely at a loss. I just want this to be over, but I don't know if it ever will be. Please, if anyone has any advice, I'm begging you. I don't know how much longer I can keep going like this.